For months now, I've had in the back of my head an idea for a video where I talk about whether New York City subways are actually dangerous. Given that A, I live in New York, B, there is a lot of talk about how safe the subways are in New York, and C, I sadly had an experience a few months ago where I was spat on by another passenger. I was going to have a video on this subject at some point. However, recent events have put this video idea at the front of my list. So front and center of my list that I expedited this video. Why? Because United States Department of Transportation Secretary Duffy threatened to withhold funding from the Metropolitan Transportation Authority in New York City, known as the MTA. And this threat is because he believes the subways are full of crime and violence, and that funding should be taken away if this issue is not addressed. To use his own words, quote, "The trend of violent crime, homelessness, and other threats to public safety on one of our nation's most prominent metro systems is unacceptable. After years of soft on crime policies, our department is stepping in to restore order." End quote. So, are the subways in New York dangerous and crime ridden, as Duffy claims? Let's take a look. Before outlining whether the subways in New York are dangerous and crime ridden, I think we have to establish that something is dangerous if it represents a threat to the life or well being of a person, and that something is a crime if it can be prosecuted and is punishable by law. I go to great lengths to establish these definitions because some of the things that some people, including the Transportation Secretary himself, consider as issues of safety and/or crime are not actually crimes or representative of anything dangerous. The most notable example of this is homelessness, which is one of the issues Secretary Duffy wants addressed. Homelessness, by itself, is not a crime. I repeat, homelessness is not a crime. Nor is homelessness an issue that by itself causes the subways to be unsafe. Rather, it is a safety net issue. Namely, it's an issue of there being an inadequate safety net for too many vulnerable Americans. And it's getting worse. Not just on the subways in New York, but in the United States as a whole. Homelessness is increasing across the country. Now, I will acknowledge that homelessness is very much visible on the subways, as I don't think I can go more than about 2 subway commutes without seeing someone begging for money or a homeless individual sleeping on the train. But as long as there are homeless individuals around, some of them will be on the train, because it's one of the few sheltered and warm places when the weather is cold, wet, or windy outside. Fare evasion is also an issue worth talking about, and it's an issue Secretary Duffy brought up. Fare evasion creates a perception of disorder, but fare evasion, in isolation, without any other actions, does not make the subways dangerous. And it's a bit of a gray area as to whether fare evasion is even a crime. The New York County District Attorney's Office declines to prosecute it as a crime, and there are some places where fare evasion is a civil case, while there are other places where fare evasion is a criminal case. Regardless of all that legalese, though, this is perhaps a controversial take, but fare evasion on the New York City subways is no worse of an action than the people obstructing their license plates to try and avoid paying the fee for congestion pricing in New York City. And yes, this has happened. Goodness me. I wonder when Secretary Duffy is going to send a press release about disorder on New York City's roads. Though yes, fare evasion does exist, and it happens a lot in New York City subways. I see fare evasion on the subways multiple times a week. But it's an issue with other transit systems too, and not just New York. It's not like the MTA is ignoring this issue, though. They had a whole panel where they looked at potential solutions to fare evasion. I wonder if Secretary Duffy is even aware of the existence of this panel. Also, as a side note, it's quite fascinating that the Trump administration is worried about the fare evasion of working class New Yorkers. All the while, the Trump organization has been caught doing tax evasion. Just saying. However, there are other things that are perceived as issues of crime or safety in the subways and are indeed big issues. For example, murder. There are more murders on the subways now than there were pre pandemic. You can see that fact on this chart. I think it's worth asking why, as well as how to address that. It's a very concerning and disturbing trend. Another public safety issue is assaults on transit workers. This is an issue Secretary Duffy brought up, and this is indeed a safety issue. MTA data in Streets blog shows that attacks against New York City transit workers have been climbing over the past several years, with it getting worse since the pandemic started. So it is a very disturbing problem in New York City. Even more disturbing because I sense that many of these assaults are on workers who are just as eager to get from point A to point B as you are. A PSA to anyone listening to this video: please treat your rank and file transit workers with respect. And a second PSA: more often than not, delays you experience during your commute are due to factors beyond the control of the train conductor, the subway driver, or the bus driver. So please keep that in mind. And as for people dying due to suicide events, another concern Duffy has raised, this is an issue. Like with murders, there have been more people jumping on the tracks over the past few years, for example. This is very concerning and disturbing. So, while I call into question the focus on fare evasion and homelessness from Secretary Duffy, it seems like I've shown that the subways in New York City have a lot of crime and are dangerous. Right? Actually, it's a little complicated. Here's why. The legitimate safety issues I talked about, particularly with assaults on transit workers and suicides, are part of larger, disturbing national trends. In the case of assaults on transit workers, the Urban Institute found that this is part of a nationwide trend with assaults increasing against transit workers, and that it isn't just a New York City issue. As for suicides, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, the adjusted suicide rate has increased by 16% from 2011 to 2022, showing that suicide events on the subways might be part of that disturbing national trend. Even in the case of the increase in subway murders, I've heard that subway public safety has been a concern in several other American cities, not just New York. Overall, while crime and public safety are legitimate concerns with New York City subways, it seems like these issues are microcosms of concerning nationwide trends. When looking at it all as part of a nationwide trend, more than anything else, then it seems like the right thing to do is to brainstorm national solutions to some of these nationwide problems, rather than focus on one city, as Secretary Duffy seems to be doing. I was tempted to end this video on the note of making some snarky or sharp criticism of Secretary Duffy or the Trump administration. But I think I'll end this video on a more positive note than that. I'll end this video by saying that, while I do think crime and public safety are legitimate concerns on New York City subways, I also strongly believe that the majority of people taking the New York City subways are decent human beings. That belief was actually reinforced with the spitting incident I mentioned in the beginning of this video. Despite the fact that many of us these days are on our phones and therefore have limited awareness of what's going on around us, I remember at least 3 onlookers reacting to the spitting incident with absolute horror, and 2 of the onlookers helping me in tangible ways after I was spat upon. On that night, I encountered 1 not so great human being, and at least 3 decent and caring human beings. That belief is also reinforced by the fact that I've seen far more instances of strangers helping each other on the subways with directions than acts of violence on the subways. Overall, there are some not so great people on the subways, but I think that they are far outnumbered by the number of people with big hearts who take these subways. And if Secretary Duffy doesn't realize that yet, I hope that he will one day come to realize this. On that positive note, I ask people to smash the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you and have a good day.